Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started, but we know many others are still joining us. On behalf of Regional Educational Laboratory Midwest and the Region 9 Comprehensive Center, I'd like to welcome you to today's quick chat webinar. My name is Emily Loney, and I serve as the Communications Director for REL Midwest, and we're really glad that you are able to join us from wherever you sit during what we know is a challenging and unprecedented time. Before we begin, I wanted to share a few pointers about our Zoom platform. You can connect to audio by clicking the audio button, and you're welcome to join by phone or through your computer. You can click on the chat box, as many of you have been doing, to ask questions for the presenter or let us know about any technical issues. You have an option in that chat box to select to either send a comment to our presenters or to all attendees. If you have a question for the presenters, I recommend maybe sending it to them just so that it doesn't get lost in the chat box. We also have live closed captioning available during the webinar, and to see those captions, click on the closed caption button. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived, and we'll be sending a follow-up email following the webinar to let you know when the link to that video is available. I'm really pleased to welcome our three speakers for today's webinar. First, we have Marshal Conley, who's a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant with REL Midwest. We also have Lindsey Jensen, who's a high school English teacher at Dwight Public Schools and is the 2018 Illinois Teacher of the Year. She also serves as an advisory board member to the Region 9 Comprehensive Center. We're also pleased to have Jim Johnson, who's a junior high social studies teacher with School District 308 in Oswego, Illinois. Briefly, we'd like to introduce the two organizations that are co-hosting this event. The Region 9 Comprehensive Center is operated through the U.S. Department of Education and provides intensive capacity building services to state education agencies and other stakeholders in Illinois and Iowa. REL Midwest is part of a network of 10 regional educational laboratories that are also funded through the U.S. Department of Education through its Institute of Education Sciences. REL Midwest serves a 7-state Midwest region with Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Our team at REL Midwest conducts numerous projects in collaboration with partners in the region, including research studies, technical support and coaching projects, and events like this that connect research to practice. We want to acknowledge that as overwhelming as this current situation is, many across the REL program are working to pull together resources to meet your needs and questions. And there's a work group being formed to consider additional events and resources that we can provide around e-learning and other topics. So I'd encourage you to add your needs and questions in the chat box during today's webinar. We'll try to address some of the questions on a call with presenters as we can, but all of the questions and comments will be shared back with that work group to inform work moving forward. I also want to flag that we have a follow-up webinar planned with REL Midwest on April 8th. That will go into greater depth about research-based resources for e-learning, including a discussion around how to meet the social and emotional learning needs of your students in an online environment. And we'll include a link to register for that webinar in the chat box. With that, I will pass it over to Marshal. Thank you again for joining us.
Hey everybody, as Emily mentioned, I'm Marshal Conley. I'm joining you from Geneseo, Illinois today, and I'm going to share with you a quick set of tips for adapting to everything going on with our schools and kids right now. After that, we'll hear from our teacher guests as they add some real life context to what I'm about to share. So when compiling this information, and really as I've been monitoring and observing everything happening online recently, from Facebook groups to Twitter to everything coming from ed tech organizations and vendors, I realized just how much information is out there for teachers and families, and it's all bombarding us at the same time. So before I get into these items, I want to be clear that these are not the only tips and strategies out there. And none of them are a magic bullet that will solve all your issues and answer all your questions in this continuously changing environment. What these tips are, though, are things that are aligned with what we know from the research on good teaching. And there are also things that are adaptable or well suited for application in an online or blended learning environment. We'll talk briefly, and realistically, we could have full webinars on any of these topics, but we'll talk about universal design for learning, making sure we're working to attend to the diverse needs of all learners, being safe online and good consumers of information, working to maintain positive relationships with students, and attending to equity in what we see as the digital divide or the homework gap. As we discuss, as Emily mentioned, please feel free to connect in the chat by asking questions, engaging with others, and sharing examples of things you're doing related to these topics. So to start, we want to look at universal design of learning, or UDL. And when we say that, we look at UDL as a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. And UDL is centered on 3 principles, which you can see here, and each one is well suited to offer some simple ideas to keep in mind when designing virtual learning experiences. First, we want to provide multiple means of representation and note that learners differ in the ways that they perceive and comprehend information that's presented to them. So when working in a virtual and blended situations, this could mean using video, audio, animation, and other media to allow students to interact with content in multiple ways at home. This isn't just a necessity because you're teaching online. There's also, learning science backing it up. So that's nice bonus. Next, we want to provide multiple means of action and expression with the understanding that learners differ in the ways that they navigate a learning environment and express understanding. So this can mean focusing on project-based learning that allows learners to create their own learning products, including those that don't necessarily require them to use technology to express their learning. Remember, information can be transmitted back and forth online. You may be interacting with students in an online environment, but learning engagement can and should happen in analog too. Online learning is more than just clicking through math drill apps and doing virtual worksheets. And so this reminds us of that. Third, we want to provide multiple means of engagement. Learners differ in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to learn. Try to use technology to personalize the learning experience with open-ended activity prompts that serve as jumping off points for engagement, including opportunities for students to create authentic real-world application of learning. Once you're able to work through the overwhelming nature of this challenge, you might find a kind of a new world of flexibility here if you have space to focus purely on learning engagement with students and kids. So there's a good deal of information on UDL available online, and there's one link here on the screen that captures these guidelines and more that we'd encourage you all to check out. Our next tip is really closely related to UDL. It involves making sure our learners with diverse needs are represented in how we transition to virtual learning. You're undoubtedly awash right now in different types of online resources, and you can be a good partner to families and teachers by making sure that resources are accessible to students with disabilities, English learners, and other groups. I mean, this includes looking for features in technology products like closed captioning for videos, the ability to turn on narration for written content, and accessible user interfaces, things like different input options, use of touch screens, gesture recognition, and even more complex stuff like brain interfaces and haptic feedback. One resource we can share right now is PowerUp Works. There's a link there on the slide. PowerUp provides research, resources, and tools to use the principles of UDL and integrate technology to enhance teaching and learning. And you can see here they're at powerup.org, powerupwhatworks.org. And at this point, you've heard me mention a few times the sheer volume of resources and information right now. You can use this as a teaching and learning point related to digital citizenship. Not only can you teach students how to be good consumers of online information and products, but you can model this for students, even explicitly explaining why a certain app or website is a good source and how you came to that decision. This, of course, involves carefully reviewing and vetting digital resources from which you build your new curriculum. And so be thoughtful and understand that free and heavily marketed doesn't always equal quality. And finally, with this, it's always important, but it's very important right now as screen time for kids is skyrocketing, and it's going to continue to increase, is to teach students to be good digital citizens, including how to be safe online, how to interact positively with peers, and how to protect their privacy and identity. On the parent and teacher side, read terms of use and do your best to understand what vendors and platforms are doing with the data they're collecting as your kids use those products. Next, we want to talk about something that can help cope with everything that comes right now with social distancing. All right, having trusted and supportive relationships with students is a promising strategy to help students develop both academic and non-academic skills. And we know from research that students who connect with at least one trusted adult in school are more resilient and have a stronger sense of well-being. That's incredibly important right now particularly with kids who, due to different and challenging home and family situations, may see that their primary interactions with any adults are with those teachers, and now they're separated from them. So that's important to keep in mind. And when it comes to this tip, I want to stress that working virtually sometimes might feel like you have to be doubly productive or work super hard and focus on justifying the value of what you're doing, because it's not like what you were doing before. But it's also important for kids to get that well-rounded, positive social and emotional experience from schools. These are all things that you can do to work towards that. And I'd say do what you can to disconnect them from academics and let them just be about building a positive relationship. Things like using virtual meeting and collaboration tools to hold online social discussions or classroom community time, publishing a daily message via video or podcast to jumpstart your students' day and let them know you care about them, and using blogs and online journaling to have discussions about student writing that's focused on expression and connection. And of course, interacting in all these environments in a safe and responsible way, as we mentioned before. The last tip we want to discuss is related to equity. In our haste to move online, we need to remember that not every student has access to a reliable device at home. Not every student has reliable high-speed internet connectivity, especially high enough speed that's required to use some of the more sophisticated platforms that they're trying to use. And this is particularly true for kids living in remote and rural areas. Further, kids that thrive with high-touch support and structure may not have an adult at home capable of assisting them with things like accessing content and even organizing themselves and how to schedule their new academic day and answering homework questions. So we want to be sure to understand how these contribute to a still present digital divide in our country and what's known as the homework gap. So you'll see here 3 resources. CASEL, COSIN, and CETA are 3 national organizations doing work in this area. And you can find their help and their resources from these links. So that wraps up our really rapid tour of some tips you can use as you're thinking about the new reality of school. So at this point, I'm thrilled to introduce again Lindsey, Jensen, and Jim Johnson. As Emily mentioned, Lindsey teaches English at Dwight Township High School in Dwight, which is in north central Illinois, and Jim is a social studies teacher at Plank Junior High in Oswego, which is in the western Chicago suburbs. So thanks for being with us today. Our audience is really eager to hear from some real live teachers navigating this challenging situation. So I'm going to pass the mic back to Emily to lead that discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Marshall. Thank you for everyone adding questions to the chat box. I will say I've seen a group of questions around early learning, which I think is a key topic to address. We have a junior high and a high school teacher on this conversation, but I just want to acknowledge that I see that as a huge need and something we're aware of. So know that we may not get to that in today's conversation, but I'll just highlight that as something that's clearly coming through in your questions and what we're aware of as the field's needs. I'd like to begin with letting Jim and Lindsey introduce themselves and maybe tell us a little bit about what did your classroom look like maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago, and what is your classroom and your e-learning experience looking like in the last 1 or 2 weeks of e-learning?
I guess I'll start, Jim. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us in what is just an unprecedented time in education. 3 weeks ago, oh, I'm gonna try not to get emotional. 3 weeks ago, it was status quo. We were in the middle of, I teach junior and senior English at Dwight Township High School. So I spend my days with 11th, or I did spend my days with 11th and 12th graders. And it's the greatest joy of my life. And in my senior English classes, we were actually in the middle of filming podcasts that the kids were creating, and they were in the middle of, they had just started filming those. And when I think about how much has changed, and I think about life as we know it now, I think I'm experiencing what all teachers are experiencing right now, and that is just kind of trying to navigate the unknown. I think all of our kids in this scary moment, they need as much consistency as we can provide to them, and that is really challenging, obviously. I am a big believer that in my classroom, where we read, we write, we engage in debate, we engage in discourse, And I've had to accept that there just is no way I'm going to be able to replicate what happens physically in my classroom. But I'm trying to capitalize on some of the things that my students are used to using. We are a school that promotes Google and Google Classroom. My students are really familiar with that. Obviously, from an equity standpoint, there are major challenges, particularly because we are a rural school. So our school has actually been great, our district, about we're actually providing Chromebooks to students. We're actually delivering those next week. We're currently on spring break, but we'll be back doing e-learning, I believe, next week. And our district is working with families to provide them with free internet. And I'm very grateful to have a district that is, keeping that equity piece on their radar. But basically, my life is just different as everyone else's is, and anything that we are offering digitally or virtually online, we're really conscientious that if and when we go back to school, that we can't assume that all kids were able to access materials online, and therefore there are already conversations happening about time being built into the school day again if and when we return, so that we can ensure that all kids have access to the materials. So that's where we're at right now. I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Do you want to tell us a bit more about what life looks like for you now and what it was like before? Jim, I think you're muted.
Unmute. There we go. So Oswego 308 is predominantly a typical suburban type school area. My particular school is about 50% of free and reduced lunch. So we have a little bit of a different challenge than most of the people in our district do. We are a Google Chromebook cart pushing from room to room kind of district. The 8th grade social studies curriculum is a combination of already things that are online and also things that are sort of hands-on learning. Prior to this event, we were in the midst of studying Lewis and Clark and kind of trying to make out some differences between sources and just going through the different standards that are provided by the state of Illinois. One of the things that we struggle with is just trying to make sure that we have that accessibility for students. Once this event took place, it became sort of a rush to find how can we communicate with our students and basically what is already in place. The Google Classroom is fine, but because we are not a one-to-one district, we don't have kids with Chromebooks at home who can then access everything that we put in Google Classroom as they would do in your classroom when they have a Chromebook card available. I found actually YouTube to be a very accessible way because most of the kids have their phones and that's extremely accessible to them. We've used that sort of to incorporate now a way of communicating with kids by having traditional or standard online office hours where kids can log in, you're on your YouTube live and they can kind of ask you direct questions one-to-one. I feel like that FaceTime with our kids is something that we really need to replicate, and that's something we've been working very hard to try to do. The curriculum is somewhat different. Our district has told us that we're not to be grading any of the material in terms of counting for an actual grade because of the inequity piece of it. They wanted to make sure that we aren't penalizing any kids in the grade book that are, not able to do whatever it is we're asking our students to do online. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. We've had 1 week of classes and then we had a week of spring break. And so we're gearing up currently for our 2nd week of e-learning.
Jim and Lindsey, I know we've talked a little bit together about meeting the social emotional needs of your students, and I know you guys have some fun examples of kind of how you're trying to connect with your students. Could you guys maybe share an example of what you're doing to kind of keep that bond up with your students during what feels like a kind of turbulent time?
Sure. Well, my number one priority right now is that my students know how much I miss them and that I'm thinking of them every second of every day. And the academic piece, I wanted to touch on that, and then I'll talk about the social emotional. we were instructed by our district not to provide more than 15 minutes of work per class per day. And like Jim, we are not allowed to, nothing that occurs is allowed to negatively impact student grades. So, you know, there's all of this focus on the academics, and that's so important too. But again, the social emotional piece. Trying to find creative ways to reach out to kids to let them know I'm thinking of them. Lots of emailing going on. I obviously am not friends with my students on social media, but I swore I would never ever do TikTok. I thought, I don't get it, it's not for me. And my kids absolutely love TikTok. So they were all pretty excited when I joined TikTok this week, and I made them a video just saying how much I miss them, and I posted it to our Google Classroom. And within minutes, you know, I email a class and I'll get a couple that respond back, but for some reason, TikTok, within an hour, over 100 of them had responded and liked and shared and said how much they miss school. And so, you know, I think as we're giving kids a bit of grace, you know, teachers, we need to give teachers a bit of grace as well, but it's going to require all of us stepping outside of our comfort zones. And at this point, I'm just trying to capitalize on, you know, the things, the platforms that my kids love, and I'm really trying to engage with them on those platforms, because right now it's just difficult to communicate. And but I want them to know that I'm thinking of them beyond just academics and curriculum, but that I genuinely miss them and am worried about their well-being while they're not in school.
Sure. Jim, do you have any examples of how you're connecting with your students?
Well, I am on TikTok now, and that's a new thing for everybody. And yeah. Well, one of the things that we really have tried to do with my particular group of kids, I also coach 3 sports, cross country and then basketball. So those kids, I have an even closer connection to beyond the regular classroom students. We've actually hosted Zoom meetings, team meetings. We're not even in season at this point, but we just got on last night for a half hour and talked about basketball. And that was just a nice way to connect with all of the kids. I actually hosted yesterday for the first time an online Minecraft through Xbox, where me and many students, in fact, so many that kept crashing, just wanted to play Minecraft together and talk and goof around and have a good time. So getting away from the academic part, but just making sure we have that connection, because for me, that personal relationship with the students has always been the most important part of getting them to perform. The junior high kids are so connected with making sure they have an adult in their life that cares about them, that will lead them. And it's amazing how much more they'll produce for you when they feel that connection with you. So that's very important. And then of course, staff. We've had 3 or 4 different kind of staff meetings. I think it's just an excuse at this point because everybody's so bored at home to get on and talk and communicate and talk about the students that we miss very much at this point.
Great. The next question I wanted to ask the 2 of you was what it has looked like partnering with guardians and parents and families as you're kind of passing off some instruction. I know you're maybe working with, you know, some older students who maybe can be in control of their learning, but I'm sure there's still a lot of, you know, communication with those who are working at home with students.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on a question that was in the chat box as well. Lots of questions about TikTok. I've only been on TikTok now for 3 days, but it's pretty user friendly as far as the appropriate use. I highly recommend having, you know, everything set to private. My kids can only see, you know, what I allow them to see. There's no following them on my end, because there are, just like any social media platform, there are inappropriate things on, you know, Facebook, Twitter, and on TikTok. So I wanted to be really clear about that. I had a couple of people asking. To answer your question, Emily, as far as engaging, you know, when I think about schools, I think in this moment, now more than ever, we are reminded about the relationship between school, community, and home. And when I think about engaging with families and parents, you know, our school, we delivered over 260 meals a day last week. So that was, you know, our administrators, teachers who were willing to go and help out. I mean, and at the time, you know, we tried to keep a small group, but I mean, there are kids, we have kids in our building who, with families, kids in our building who, they don't have food and they're not eating if they're not in school. So So there's obviously, that's an extreme example of how we are engaging with parents and families. We're literally feeding kids who aren't in school right now, and that's just worries me. But in addition, you know, I have senior parents who are really concerned about, you know, they're emailing asking about milestones, right? Things like prom, things like graduation. And so while I'm trying to manage connecting with kids academically and socially, I'm also trying to manage a lot of really valid concerns from parents about, you know, these milestones in their kids' lives that they fear they're going to miss out on. And unfortunately, I don't have answers for them, but I just try to continue to be a source of support. And finally, I also teach AP English. So there's an added concern from parents who are emailing constantly about how are we going to get our kids ready for this AP English exam. I'm obviously doing a lot of engaging and Zoom conferencing with my AP English class, and it's challenging, but aside from our students being concerned, there are definitely concerns from parents, and I'm hearing from them frequently and trying my best to ease those worries and to just let them know that I will continue to be a formidable force in their kids' lives and be here to support them in whatever way I can.
Thanks, Lindsey.
There are a couple of things I've noticed scrolling through that I'd like to touch on along with doing with parents. One of the people had asked about doing Zoom meeting with parents. I highly recommend that. I actually find the face-to-face is much better than email in terms of getting the parents to open up and kind of share their struggles and what they're doing with. I feel like keyboard warriors, and all the teachers know what I'm talking about, will subside, and you'll get to the heart of what's going on, and they'll see your genuineness a little bit better when you're face to face with them. Number two, somebody asked about elementary school, and I will share that I have a couple of people in my cohort that I've worked with who are doing readings online, and they are recording them. They're using YouTube, and then they're sending those out, which again is very easily accessible. Parents can access it on their phones, so their kids can read along with the teacher at night. That's one of the things they're doing with the elementary school. And then again, they're doing a lot of collaboration. One of my friends, Pam Click, who works 3rd grade elementary, she also teaches 4th grade accelerated reading, so she's in that vein. She also does a lot of stuff online where she invites both the parents and the kids so that they can kind of do the technology together. So they're kind of having like a giant classroom and parent meeting all at the same time. And she's doing not only readings with her kids, but she's doing online activities. So art projects, or the other day, they all baked blueberry muffins together, for example, and the parents and the kids and the teacher all did it together via Zoom. So that was a really nice, just interactive thing, again, that they did. In terms of also connecting with the parents, now, it may greatly depend a little bit on the groundwork that you've laid prior to this event taking place, but my parents have always been very quick to email and ask a lot of questions. I think when you establish with the parents that they know you're going to be online at a particular time and open that up to them as well, that can certainly help them ask questions and get them to the point of answering, you know, some of the things that they're dealing with. And, you know, they're struggling with the same things we are. I have a class of 35 kids, and how do you get those 4 to, you know, stop goofing around? And now it's your child in your own house, and you're still having that issue. How do you get them to stop goofing around? And now they have 1,000 distractions instead of just those few kids. So those conversations, just being real and honest, I think really help the parents kind of adapt to what you're trying to get them to do.
Jim and Lindsey, it's hard. Oh, sorry, Lindsey.
Hey, Emily, is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated what he said about, you know, being open, being honest. And that applies to our students too. I know that the relevance of certain activities varies by grade level, but, you know, I teach high school kids, and this is not a time when I'm going to assign them punitive work. I'm going to give them choices. I'm going to try to be open-ended, or as open-ended as I can be. For instance, one day it was, I was fortunate to have one day with my kids to kind of prepare them for the potential of us having an open-ended amount, an indefinite amount of e-learning days. where we basically, I gave the kids these reflection sheets, these podcast reflection sheets, and a link to school appropriate podcasts for teens. And each day they were kind of picking which ones they listened to and then filling out these reflection sheets. And if they could, they were engaging in conversations online about those podcasts. But in addition, you know, I think we also, this is a moment when in my class, like my AP kids, I'm really encouraging them to focus on media, focus on the media, examine rhetoric that's taking place currently and why. I think this is just a really important moment where, for me at least, giving my kids choice and a little flexibility, a lot of flexibility in what kinds of things they're examining, what they're reading, what they're writing, what they're producing. I think poetry is more important now than ever before to kind of document this unprecedented moment in real time. But I think that just as we are asking for flexibility, we have to provide that same flexibility to our kids. And so for me, at least, in structuring my assignments, I'm really trying to include a lot of student choice, you know, providing them with a menu, a large menu of options, but then, you know, just so I don't want this to feel punitive to my high school kids. And so that's driving a lot of my decision making in this moment.
Thanks. I know that there are some people joining us who are maybe thinking that their district or school may be about to move to e-learning. So I'm wondering if you guys kind of have like a final tip or something, you know, whether it's a mindset or a strategy, but what would you say to maybe a teacher who's going to now be in your shoes, you know, kind of having to pivot and make that shift?
Well, if I can say with Lindsey, as a father of 3 daughters, one who is a senior, I can tell you, I really appreciate the varied approach in those assignments, because when it's always watch a video and answer the questions, boy, do they get bored really quickly. So it's always nice to have that choice. I noticed that somebody had asked a question about how do you motivate kids 6 through 12 to do the work when it's not accountable? And that's always a problem, even when we don't have e-learning. One of the things that I've done is I've tried to put a carrot in place. So for instance, my Zoom meeting last week, we were doing financial responsibility and financial learning. In order to participate in the Zoom meeting where we talked about stock prices, you had to do the pre-work on learning what the difference between credit and interest was in order to participate in the Zoom meeting. And because the kids want to participate in the Zoom meeting, that is helping drive up the numbers of kids who are completing the work. Same thing with the Minecraft. In order to participate in the Minecraft, there was a series of things that they had to do, worksheets actually, that were related to resources within any colony. And so we're just kind of trying to link things together in very creative ways to get kids to buy into the idea that this is all good for them as well. And again, if you have that relationship with the students before the e-learning begins, then it's certainly going to be easy to translate it post e-learning into e-learning.
I think for me, I love all of that, Jim. Thank you. I think for me, I've talked to a lot of educators who have been really frustrated with kind of the rollout of e-learning. I think communication is so important from admin. Whenever you're starting e-learning, admin needs to provide clear, concise expectations about what teachers are expected to do, how much work they're supposed to provide, what platforms they should or shouldn't be using. And because these are just uncharted waters, I think that sometimes that's what's getting lost in the shuffle are clearly communicated expectations. But in response to that, I think my tip or my piece of advice is just to, you know, in education, we make assumptions, right? We make assumptions sometimes about students, their families, policymakers, admin, other educators, et cetera. And this is a time when we really need to avoid making assumptions. I've been in contact, fortunately, with my admin daily, but you know, they're waiting for instructions from the State Board of Ed, who's waiting for instructions from our governor. And I think this is a moment when we all need to be reminded just to give everyone a little bit of grace as we get through this. But ultimately, we are each other's greatest resource. And so in those moments of desperation, when I just feel like the world is on fire, I've been trying to gravitate towards my colleagues, right? And we've been having as well nightly Zoom meetings where we check in. There's no pressure, but we know that it's a set time where we have this Zoom meeting. If you want to jump on, and then we're trying to gravitate and toward and support one another.
Great. It's hard. I feel like this half hour has gone very fast. Calling it a quick chat, it was exactly that. But I would like to really thank Lindsey and Jim for giving us their time during what we know is a period where they're juggling a lot, both with their students and maybe any kids at home. So thank you guys for being engaged, inspiring educators. I think we've learned a lot about what you're doing with your kids and really appreciate what you're doing. Before we wrap up, for everybody on the call, I'd just like to do one last plug for that webinar that we put in the chat box. We're going to have a longer hour-long, let's go back. There are a few additional resources that the Department of Ed and the REL network has. Like we've been saying in the chat box, we will get this out to you with live links. And I know some of these resources have also been shared in the chat box. So know that this is coming to you up on our REL Midwest website within the next week or so. And then next we have a webinar on April 8th that's going to go into more depth around social emotional learning in this virtual space, looking at different platforms, and that's going to be with a panel of experts. So if you were hungry for content, we're gathering up all of your questions and hopefully going to feed it into that and some of the other work that the work group is doing. So I'd encourage you to follow REL Midwest and the Region 9 Comprehensive Center to stay up to date on the activities that we're doing. Follow us on Twitter. You can sign up for our newsletters, but we really thank you guys for joining us today and engaging in this conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.